Welcome back to one more video. Today we're going to talk about metadata in Power Query. I'm going to teach you some basics and then show a very interesting use case that will inspire you to use metadata. Let's find out. Metadata is a topic that is not talked about a lot, and the Power Query M language has a concept called metadata, and it's basically information about your values. So just to get very specific, what does metadata look like? Now on my screen there's just nothing right now. So let's start with some basic code saying I have the year 2024. So 2024 is a value, but attached to this value could potentially be metadata. Now you can inspect that by using the value metadata function on a value. And if I look at it, I still need the equal sign, of course. I find that it's empty right now. Okay, so what if we wanted to add some information to this value? To do that, you have several options. One of the obvious ones would be to use value replace metadata. And as a second argument, you can then provide a record with both field names and field values that you want to attach as information. So I could add, open a record, and an ID is 1. Name is Rick de Groot. And now I'm going to close my curly square brackets and the parentheses. What did I do wrong? I should still have an equal sign here. Exactly. So what happened here? The output of this still is our value, but it doesn't mean that the metadata is the same. If I go to the next step that references the 2024 value where we attach metadata, I can now say value metadata as a function, close my parentheses. And the outcome of this is a record that provides us all of the information that's in there. So we just added ID is 1, name is Rick de Groot, and query folding is something that just gets added automatically. We don't need this. So metadata does not change your value in any way. It just attaches some descriptions. You could see it like that. Now I showed you a more complex way here, but if I want to, I could do something identical. Let me just copy the code by using the meta keyword. So if I paste this and I only want to have 2024 here, I could put the word meta here. And actually this is identical to what we just did. So I could say, here we go. And if I then again reference, in this case, we're in custom 2. And custom 1, the next step references that custom 2. You can see that this also attaches the metadata. Now I want to call the second step source 2. So we have 2 significant values that are separate from each other. And just for this exercise, for understanding, we're going to have 2025 here with an ID 2. And name, let me just put BI Gorilla here. Okay. Now what can we do if we don't want to have any metadata on these values? There is another function for this, which is value remove metadata. So the source 2 step had 2025 with some metadata attached. Now this value remove metadata step removes it again, and we can check that by again using value metadata around this. And you'll find that it's empty except for that query folding default metadata part. That's how. How could you remove metadata otherwise? An alternative could be that instead of using the remove metadata, we would say replace metadata, and we would replace it with an empty record. And if I then look and inspect it, you'll find that only that query folding part is there, which we are not able to remove. Now, let's say we have some values, just like here. So we have a value with metadata with ID 1, and we have a value with metadata with ID 2. So what happens if we would combine these values? Let's say we would add them. Would the metadata transfer to that new value? Let's find out. So I could say I have the source value, which is 2024, plus my source 2, which is 2025. And the result of this is a value. Now let's find out, do we have any metadata that sticks to it? So we could write value metadata. And I'm going to put these between parentheses because I first wanted to add together in the as an expression and only then to find the metadata. And you can see that it's empty. So what that shows is that the metadata is attached to a value, and adding them together later on within an expression does not actually take over the metadata. But perhaps you would like to keep it. Well, in that case, we could still add some metadata to the expression. Here's how you can do that. So the expression here returns 4049. But if we want to, we could again write meta, and then we could have a value metadata of the source first. So this is my, I'll call this step expression. And if I then test what's in here, value metadata, return the results, you'll find that the metadata from source 1 is here. But since this is an expression that returns a record, I could also say that I want to merge two different records. So if I say the ampersand, and I'm also going to find the data here, I will just need to put these between parentheses. There we go. And in the next step, we can then find that it has been overwritten. Why is that? Well, in my source step, I have a field in a record that defines the ID for the metadata and the name. Now, source 2 has identical names here. And if you merge two records, the newest record will override any fields that already exist. So if I would add an S here, so we have IDs and names, then these field names are different from the field names in the source step. Now we already see here that we're going to combine the metadata fields from the source and source number 2. So go into custom 2 now. You can see that we have ID 1 named Rick, and we have ID 2 with name BI Gorilla. So that way you're actually able to also get the metadata from different values together. Okay, so those are the basics. Now I want to show you a use case that might inspire you to use metadata yourself. And for that use case, we're going to look at a little bit of code. And whereas the code might be a little bit too complex, it's okay to not understand everything as long as you can see the role of the metadata in here. So what I've done is I've created a calendar function that when you provide it with a date, it will return you a list with different fields. Now, all of these fields, they're useful by themselves, but imagine that you have a calendar with 95 fields. That's a lot. That's a lot. I have one of those calendars, and what I like having there is information to filter down the fields to only the relevant rows. So if I go to the next part, convert it to a table, I actually have access to all of the field values, and what I didn't show yet is that all of these values contain metadata. So having this table, I can add metadata with the value metadata function, which is simply this part here that references the value column and uses value metadata to return it. And in here you can see that I created an index, a descriptive data type, a description for the value. You can find some examples of what values you can expect, and then some categories as well. And if I expand this by simply clicking here and expanding, I'm going to zoom out a little bit because this is too small to see everything at once. Then you can see that I basically have a table here that provides a lot of information about my fields, which I can then use to understand my model, but also to filter down on categories or subcategories. Let me show you how I did that. My calendar function in the advanced editor looks as follows. So the function starts here. We're not going to go through everything of the code, but we're just going to look at the metadata. And the goal of this function is you provide one or more dates, and it will generate all kinds of different fields. So the logic for each of the fields is stored in this huge record here. So these are the fields name we will create, and this is the logic for each field. And now here comes the interesting part. To each of these fields, I realized they're not going to change much because the calendar table is quite fixed in the way we use it. So it was worth my effort to add some metadata information to each of these. And this is a bit of work. This is a bit of work to write, so it's not suitable for every single table you have, but it does provide you with additional context for each field. So I added metadata for examples, categories, dates, etc. And then based on my function, I create the table. Now, why is this so useful? Well, because by simply generating this and having this table information, I could now say, what columns do I want to give? What do I want to return for my query? Well, it starts with 21 columns at the start. And at the end of my query, I now have, at the bottom it shows I have 21 columns. But if I then go to the right, and suppose these were actually 95 columns, then I have a lot of work to do in selecting what columns are relevant for me and in actually understanding what each of those is. But look what we can now do with this metadata information. We go to filter here. I could now say, I want to go and only look at the month columns. So those are only 8 rows. And I've made my query in such a way that I select my columns based on the output of this filter here. So that's why if I go back to the calendar, I now only have the columns related to the months. So there's just 8 of them. And you might see in the bottom that it shows 9 columns. And the reason is that even if I don't select it, for my calendar table, I always want to see the date. So you always get the date and all of the values that were shown in the earlier step. And that's what I wanted to show you about metadata. So that metadata, it gives descriptions to your values, and you can store extra information that's useful for a user. Another concept that we will not cover right now is that you can use metadata to store information to custom functions, and the user interface in Power Query will actually show you information on what that function does, examples, on how you can, what kind of context it needs in its arguments. A lot of you have not subscribed to the channel yet, and my goal is to have at least 50% of you see my videos every week. So if you haven't subscribed yet, but these are videos that you like, I encourage you to subscribe. Then I'll continue making awesome videos. Hope to see you next time.